Simply put, plants have changed the world. Without plants evolving on our planet, it's very unlikely that life as we know it would have evolved as it is today. Plants arose about 475 million years ago from ancestors resembling green algae. This timeline shows the evolutionary timeline for how plants evolved over the last hundreds of millions of years. We could say that major evolutionary events in plants include the origins of these specialized parts, including vascular tissue, pollen, seeds, and flowers. Now, not all plants have these features, but some plants do. And the plants that have all of these features would be considered to be the most advanced plants on our planet. The presence or absence of those characters is therefore how we can define each plant group on a tree of life diagram. For example, here we can see all 4 of the plant groups, the so-called bryophytes, the seedless vascular plants, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms. And we can see how these characteristics are laid out on this tree of life, helping us distinguish among the groups. Bryophytes are defined as having no vascular tissue, seeds, or flowers. Recall, vascular tissue is those discrete tubes that moves food and water through plants. So instead of having a nice type of tissue to move food and water, they just have to very primitively diffuse water and sugars dissolved in water from cell to cell. An example of a bryophyte is a moss. The origin of vascular tissue, therefore, which is that tissue that transports both water and nutrients in the plant, allowed plants to grow taller. Taller plants could reach above their neighbors in the struggle for sunlight to maximize their photosynthesis. Vascular tissue consists of 2 different types. We have phloem and xylem. Phloem is the tissue that moves the sugars that are made by photosynthesis. Xylem transports the water, and typically that water is going to move from the roots in the stem to the leaves of our plant. Modifications in vascular tissue led to the evolution of the seedless vascular plants. An example of a seedless vascular plant is a fern. Now, these ferns do have nice vascular tissue, however, they have no seeds. Instead, they reproduce with primitive spores. The origin of seeds, which are defined as dormant, protected plant embryos with a supply of food, was also adaptive. If you can keep your baby in a seed, then that seed might be able to travel farther away from the parent and only germinate when the environmental conditions are favorable. Gymnosperms are the plants with both vascular tissues and seeds. And an example of a gymnosperm is a pine tree. And here we can see a picture of a pine cone that contains that seed. More recently, the origin of flowers and fruits introduced new reproductive adaptations. The group of organisms that have flowers and fruits are called the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. The angiosperms have very advanced flowers, and then after their flowers get fertilized, they produce a fruit. The fruit contains the seed, and the seed is a baby plant. This is why angiosperms are considered to be the most advanced plants on our planet today. All right, here's your first question. A newly discovered plant in the rainforest has both xylem and seeds but no flowers. What is it? A bryophyte, a seedless vascular plant, a gymnosperm, or an angiosperm? Please pause the lecture if you don't want to see the answer yet. The answer is gymnosperm, because gymnosperms don't have flowers, but rather they have cones, and the seeds are produced in their cones. The similarity among plant life cycles is evidence that all plants share a common ancestor. And this part of the lecture is a little bit challenging, so bear with me as I explain this life cycle process. The plant life cycle is called alternation of generations, in which a multicellular diploid stage alternates with a multicellular haploid stage. And remember, diploid cells are those cells that have 2 sets of chromosomes per cell. In plants, diploid cells are going to make up most of the cells of the plant's body. Haploid cells are going to be those cells that only have 1 set of chromosomes per cell. Those haploid cells are going to include both the spores and the gametes. Here's the diploid stage, which makes up most of this fern plant's life cycle, contrasted with the haploid stage, in which most of the reproduction will be directly occurring. A zygote develops by mitosis into a multicellular diploid sporophyte. Now, this word sporophyte refers to the part of the plant that makes up most of the plant's body, in this example of this fern. The sporophyte produces spores by meiosis cell division. And this is unique because if you remember back from when we learned about human reproduction, humans make their reproductive gametes by meiosis, but plants make their spores by meiosis. Those spores then divide and grow into the next part of the plant's life cycle, which is called a multicellular haploid gametophyte. The haploid gametophyte produces gametes by mitotic cell division. So that is to say, the gametes, which is the sperm and the egg, are made by the same type of cell division as is every other cell in the plant's body except for the spores. Spores are the only cell type that are made by meiosis in our plant life cycle. When a sperm fuses with an egg, we have fertilization, and this results in a diploid zygote, that baby plant that can grow into a mature plant, starting the cycle anew. The sporophyte and gametophyte shown in this plant life cycle is generalized and specific to a seedless vascular plant only. So this is an example for you to see, but do note that these life cycles are different for all of the 4 evolutionary plant groups that we just talked about. Substituting images in the alternation of generations produces diagrams of the other plant life cycles. Let's see if we understand plant life cycles. How many of the items in the following list are considered haploid? We've got zygote, gamete, sporophyte, spore, and gametophyte. And your choices are 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these items are haploid. So please pause the lecture if you don't want to see the answer. 3 is the answer. The only items in the list that are haploid are gamete, spore, and the gametophyte part of our generation. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can understand all the features that differentiate the 4 major groups of plants that are found on our planet today.